Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. So we are continuing in our Bible Basics class, and we're actually going through discussing different Bible versions. And we have come to the place where we are going to actually hear from Norman Geisler. He does a great job. There's no sense in me just repeating what he said. So I think that you should probably hear it from him.
Welcome. How do Christians know that the Bible came from God? What's the evidence? Well, in the past 5 programs, we've been presenting that evidence, and today we have an equally important question. That is, how do we interpret the Bible? Dr. Geisler introduces this question, and I'd like you to listen.
The Bible, how should we interpret it? In the big chain from God to us, we've discovered who wrote the Bible, men of God inspired by God. Did they copy it accurately? Is anything missing? Are there any errors in it? Has it been translated correctly? And so we've got a Bible in our hand that's substantially the same as the original that was given by God, that was infallible and inerrant. Now the question is, how do we interpret it? We've got cults all over the place. We've got different denominations. Whose interpretation of the Bible is correct? The Roman Catholic Church claims to be the infallible interpreter of the Bible. Then we have all these fallible interpretations of it. How do we know what it really means? That's the question we're going to discuss in this program. Okay, let me lay down some simple principles. Try to put the cookies on the bottom shelf here, because we could talk in scholarly language and everybody would be confused. Someone said the definition of a scholar is teaching something he doesn't understand to people who don't understand it either, and that's not funny. So I'll try not to be a scholar here and put the cookies on the bottom shelf. Number 1. In the Bible, the main things are the plain things, and the plain things are the main things. Don't worry about all the little details. Scholars will argue from now until doomsday what the 7 thunders uttered, who the rider and the red horse and the white horse is, which end of the tribulation we're coming out of. Don't worry about those things. The main things are the plain things, and the plain things are the main things. In other words, if you get scholars who have a good translation of the Bible, and most of them are, and they approach the Bible in the correct manner to try and find out what the author said, which I'll speak about in a moment, they'll all conclude that this is what the Bible teaches on those things. You can't read the Bible and understand what the author meant and not come to the conclusion there's a God, miracles are possible, Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus died on the cross, Jesus rose from the dead, Jesus is coming again. Okay, so the fundamentals are all there. If we just keep this principle in mind, the main things are the plain things, and the plain things are the main things. The second part of that principle is that if it's not a main thing, it's probably not a plain thing. But don't worry about it. As Mark Twain said, and we quoted in the previous programs, not the part of the Bible I don't understand that bothers me the most, it's the part I do understand that bothers me the most. So get hung up on the main things and the plain things. Third, when you read the Bible or the newspaper or a magazine, you ought to keep one principle in mind. You don't have to think of 100 things. What did the author mean by it? It's not what does it mean to me, not what I would like it to mean, but our obligation is to find out what the author meant. Now, we've got a group of people today, to use a $10 word, are called deconstructionists. They're trying to deconstruct the meaning of the Bible. They say the author is dead, the reader is alive. Doesn't matter what the author said. What does the reader say? Only one problem with those people. When you read their books, do you know what they want you to believe? They want you to understand what the author said. They don't want you to put your meaning and read it into their writing. They want you to read their meaning out of their writing. They should treat the Bible, and everybody should treat the Bible the same way. The author's meaning is the true meaning, not what the reader wants it to mean.
So the reason that I play that video for you is because I think Dr. Geisler, well, obviously he did a great job. He talks about both interpretation and the fact that there are good translations for the most part that we're using. Secondly, I don't know if any of those who follow along with a lot of the apologetics we do, he used the law of non-contradiction when he was talking about authors and books, because we went through in an earlier video and talked about the two principles of Bible interpretation, which is, or translation, excuse me, and the formal equivalence side will be more concerned with what the reader is reading and what they're thinking about it, and the literal, or backwards, the literal translators are concerned more for the text, okay? So you have a dynamic equivalence, excuse me, which was the former, which is more of a paraphrase, and the formal translations are the literal, and they try to just deal with the text. So then you're just dealing with what did the author mean as opposed to what does it mean to me. So I can apply it to me after I know what it means to me, but I need to know what it means, what the author intended, before I can understand how to apply it. And what he did was he used the law of non-contradiction. The people that say, no, it doesn't matter what the author wrote, it's what the reader wants to, how they want to understand it. Well, they don't want that done to their books. And so it violates the law of non-contradiction. You can't have two things that are opposite at the same time in the same sense. And what they're doing is they're saying, hey, we want you to read the Bible one way, but we want you to read our books a different way. So the criteria for a good translation, as we've been going through this, is, first of all, it needs to be accurate. And that's why we're looking for, formal or literal translations, right? It needs to be clear, can't be difficult. So in a sense, number one and number two, it has to be literal, and it also has to be literary. It has to have a normal cadence for the sentences so that it's understandable, at least for English, which is what we're talking about. It has to be vivid, right? The sentences and the words that are used in their translation need to be very distinct, right? It has to be orthodox. It certainly can't be unorthodox. Orthodox is what is right doctrinally. Unorthodox is what would be wrong. It preserves the ambiguities of the original. People don't like that, but we need to, if God put the ambiguities there, then they're there for a reason, and we need to try to either understand them better or learn how to work the ambiguities into the places that correlate to areas of Scripture that are clear to us. Okay, so the ambiguities are always understood in light of the clear passages. It's transparent to the original. In other words, you can follow as close as possible in the two different languages, word for word. It expects the best from its readers. In other words, the readers need to do, put some effort in. They need to do their homework, do their diligence, because that's what God expects, obviously. Otherwise, God would have had them write it differently, right? It retains the poetic form of the original. Sometimes this is difficult in translating from one language to another, but we want to try to keep it with the original idioms and whatnot as much as possible. But again, a lot of that has to do with study. It has beauty and dignity. And again, this is adopted from Leland Ryken's The Word of God in English, which, I had showed that to you in a previous video. So here, we want to listen to Dr. Geisler again.
All right, we've seen that one example of a bad translation of the Bible is the New World Translation of the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's bad because the translators were not honest in translating the words. They inserted their own ideas into the text, rather than allowing the text to accurately convey the meaning of the biblical writers. And second, we've talked about the good translations. These translations convey all major and minor doctrines of the Bible correctly, accurately. Next, what should you keep in mind when you're looking to purchase a translation of the Bible? Dr. Geisler explains.
So we've got really three kinds of translations: bad ones like the Jehovah's Witness that are distorting essential truths, good ones where all the essential truths are there, but better ones. And I would think that better ones would include the New American Standard Bible, but it's very literal, the New International Version, which is more literary, and then there's some that are kind of halfway in between that improve on the King James and are literary but still literal. That would be the New King James Version of the Bible. Still has the rhythm and cadence of the Old King James, but it got rid of the archaisms like he that letteth will now let, and quit ye like men, and so forth, and then updated it in modern language, but it's not very much of a paraphrase or interpretive. Here's what you have to keep in mind when you're looking at translations of the Bible. Who are the people that translate? Were they biased? Now, obviously, the people who translated the Revised Standard Version were biased. These were liberal scholars, and when they came to Isaiah 7:14, they said young maiden instead of virgin. Well, it had to refer to a virgin because the verse is quoted in Matthew 1:21 and following. It says, a virgin shall conceive. So it's a bad translation, and it comes out of the bias of the particular translators. Whereas the New American Standard Bible, the New International Version, is not done by biased liberal scholars. And another important thing about these translations is they're done by a committee of several scholars, not just one person ultimately, like, say, for example, the Living Bible that was done by Ken Taylor. Fine Christian, fine believer, doing it for his children, paraphrased it. But it's not a literal translation, it's a paraphrase, and often it's a devotional paraphrase, and people get blessed by it, but it's one person, and it's a paraphrase. If you want a more accurate Bible, you need to get a Bible where a committee of people, and is not really a paraphrase, but it's a translation, and that would be Bibles like the New International Version and the New King James Version of the Bible. But again, let me emphasize, all of the translations are good. We're not talking about bad versus good. We're talking about good versus better, because all the essential truths are there. They haven't been distorted, and you can pick up any of these translations apart from the Jehovah's Witness and a few other cultic translations, and all of the essential truths of the gospel are present.
So I would have to, for the most part, agree with Dr. Geisler. I mean, he kind of bottom lines it. He's a tremendous scholar. He's gone to be with the Lord at this point, and, which I miss him. But he's left a tremendous legacy, co-authored over 130 books, and, authored or co-authored, and just there's a ton of information that he had put out that's available to people that want it. Now, he mentioned paraphrases, and what about paraphrases? So paraphrases are not good translations. In fact, they're not even translations. Some people think they're translations because they are, sold with other Bibles, but they're not actually translations of the Bible. What does what do most people know a good, easy to understand Bible verse? How about, like most people know Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths. Well, if I was going to make a paraphrase, instead of trust in the Lord, with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, to paraphrase that, you may say, you want to be able to rely on God for working in different situations in your life. Don't think about what you think is a good idea, but think about what God thinks is a good idea. Now, if I put that next to those verses and I did the Scott Mitchell translation, that would be a paraphrase, because there's no way you can take those sentences and look up the words. None of the words are associated with original Hebrew words, so you could never look it up. Okay. It may explain to you, but really what I did was I more interpreted it for you. And that's what paraphrases tend to be. They tend to take the bias of the person doing the translation, and the vast majority of paraphrases are by one person. Some are decent, and some are good in some areas, and other areas they're terrible because it comes from the theological position of the person making the paraphrase. So, in some areas it may shine and hit the right point. And in some areas it may be, oh my gosh, this person missed that point entirely. Okay. So that's why, when we're talking about translations, we really shouldn't add paraphrases into it, because they're not. Now, the NIV really sits between paraphrases and translations. It's probably the loosest of any of the translations because it is thought for thought. You're not going to read it and go to hell. You're not going to misunderstand what the Bible teaches by it, but there are better translations, as Dr. Geisler said. But these are not translations. They are someone reading a translation or original language manuscript, putting it into their own words. Their own words or views can be very inaccurate. They can be accurate, but they can be very inaccurate. Examples of popular paraphrases would be the CEV, NLT, the Message, the Good News Bible, the TEV, Phillips, right? We could throw the Living Bible in there, like he mentioned about Ken Taylor. Now, some of these, honestly, are terrible. The Message is terrible. The Good News Bible, they took all the words in the New Testament were talked about blood out of it because they thought it was offensive. I mean, when you get behind it and some of these, the purposes of these people behind it, it's just, if you read about, Eugene Peterson, the guy that made the Message, I don't know that I want that guy actually teaching me the Bible, never mind giving me a Bible translation. So that's why we just need to understand and have a perspective on Bible versions or translations, and these paraphrases would be considered a different Bible version, but they're not actually a translation. A translation is a good version is a Bible translation, and really probably the top four really would be, King James, New King James, New American Standard, and the ESV. Beyond that, I think it kind of slopes down, and that'll give you an idea of, at least, in choosing Bibles. What should we do with paraphrases? Well, some can have devotional value when used with a good translation and the knowledge of what the Bible already teaches before using them. Let me give you an example. So when I'm reading the Bible, because of the Bibles that I've, had since 1982, okay, I started with the King James, went to the New American Standard for a couple of years, went back to the King James, tried to incorporate the New King James, never really get into any other translations. I looked into the manuscripts and how they came to make the translation, so I was comfortable more in the King James, New King James family of translations. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't use, other Bibles. As a matter of fact, I used some, I don't know if I would call them paraphrases, but they were borderline. Sometimes when I wrote the two books that I wrote, sometimes I would quote from different Bibles that I don't really read or whatever, but I felt like as I was writing, um, though this, though I wouldn't really recommend it as a Bible translation for you to study from, I used it in writing a book because I felt that it, in the context of what I was trying to talk about, it conveyed the Bible verse the way I wanted it, so I didn't have to explain more because, again, it did some explanation on its own, right? Which is really leaning more towards a paraphrase. So, that's why sometimes writers quote different Bibles because it says it the way they want it said. And then you don't have to say, well, this word really means that and this means that, because then you're kind of you're getting the reader off topic in their mind and bringing them kind of on a on a little side road that you don't want them going down. You want to keep their focus on the main subject that you're talking about. So now, having said that, on eSword, as a matter of fact, here, let me, so, I've showed you this before. Now, if you look, though I'm kind of in front of it, up in the top left of your screen, I think I can actually, well, I don't need to move my picture, but you can see I have a whole bunch of Bible translations. The New King James Version is highlighted. Behind me is like the King James and King James Plus. If I hit the King James Plus, you get all the different, Strong's words, their numbers, so you can look them up. But I can also, I can go into the dictionaries if I want to get more specific or whatever. My point being is that I use a lot of different Bible translations when I'm studying. And, I have another software program that, that I use that, gets into word studies and everything. But in saying all this, if I'm reading the Bible and I'm studying, effectively, though it's on a computer now, for years, I would have a bunch of different commentaries laid out on the table with me. So I have my Bible and I have the commentaries. Now, sometimes I'd have a Bible and I'd have a second Bible, a different translation, because I want to see how they translate it. Now, it's really easy now because I can basically click around in eSword, but, I may use another Bible translation that is an easier reading one because I want to see how did they translate it? What were they thinking? In other words, what do they think that, that verse or verses, what do they think it means? Because I know that the easier the reading, the more interpretation is in it. So it's almost like a quasi-commentary, okay? So comparing a good Bible translation with other versions, is not a bad thing to do. Basically what you're doing is you're getting the opinion of somebody else and what they think the verses mean, like you're reading a commentary, only it's not specifically a commentary. Hasn't gone to that point where they're making comment on it. And like I've read devotionals over the years. I'm not like a big devotional guy as far as like reading devotionals. I have a couple of favorites that I've read, My Utmost for His Highest and the one on leadership by Tozer. I like those the best. But if I'm going to be reading something, I try to take where I'm reading in the Bible. And if I have, 15 minutes and I'm going to be looking at something, like I have eSword. It's called MySword. I have it on my phone. I have an Android. I put it on there with for the most part, the same books. And, if I'm sitting in an office waiting for somebody or whatever, I'll read through and whatever I'm studying, whatever book I'm in, or if I'm looking up something for class here, I'll read a couple of commentaries, to be thinking about what it is that I want in my mind in relation to what I'm either teaching or trying to learn. And so I use all that extra time. I figure I would rather know more about a verse or something that I'm trying to study than, I guess, maybe get it like a little encouragement for the day or whatever, reading something like that. It's just how my mind works, learning it encourages me. I don't really need a kind of an encouragement in that way. The Bible encourages me. Everything about it does, everything that it says. So now, not everybody thinks like me. I may be a little boring in that way, but that's how my mind works. Number 4, it's not possible to study from paraphrase since they do not represent any actual text. Their value is very limited, if any, obviously in this way. It can be used, like I say, almost like a quasi commentary or a varied view. So here are some conclusions, right? Dynamic equivalent Bibles are not good translations, really, because they're not. The NIV, in many area paraphrases, there's actually some verses in the NIV that outshine every other Bible I've read, but that wouldn't warrant me reading the NIV as a regular Bible for all the reasons we've discussed. So they're not actual translations. The NIV would probably be, but it really does hover between two worlds. Very literal translations would be the New American Standard Bible and the Net Bible, but they are based entirely on the critical text, which are only a few manuscript scholars use for the New Testament. But if that's what you're looking for, you'll like those Bibles. Very good literary translations would be the King James, New King James, and ESV. In other words, they're literal enough so that they're not hard to read, and they're literary in the sense that they have a normal rhythm or cadence to them so that you can read them and they are easy to memorize, okay? The best literal, literary, and orthodox translations, I think, are the New King James and ESV, right? The New King James represents the majority text. That's what the MT is. The ESV represents the critical text, which is why you'll get a lot of verses in the ESV that are not in the New King James. And again, I didn't want to get into all this detail. I got a bunch of slides to explain all this, but I really don't want to. I'm trying to keep this at a high level. But the New King James represents really the majority of existing manuscripts throughout the ancient world, where the ESV represents only a few manuscripts from Alexandria, Egypt. Oftentimes the ESV is very similar to the King James, but there are, when it gets to certain places, definite differences. But a lot of places are similar. The advantage of the King James in many Bibles support helps is basically that it's keyed to the words. In other words, there's a lot of support for the Old King James because the Strong's Concordance was originally, strong. This guy basically went through every word in the Old King James, put a number to it, Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek in the New Testament, so that you could then look it up. And he had a lexicon in the back of his concordance, so you could look up the word, and then you could, we can do that all electronically now. It's very easy. But the language can be difficult for people. Now, the New King James fills the gap and gives the best of both worlds for those who want the majority text representation. The thing I really like about the New King James is that Arthur Farstad, who was the general editor, he was a majority text scholar, and though the New King James is really an update to the King James, in other words, it updated the language and then also took into consideration some more manuscripts that were found. But sometimes the Old King James did not exactly represent the majority text. And then there's a footnote, unless it's a $2 Bible or something for the New King James. But, any decent New King James version that is a study Bible or has references in it, they'll normally have down at the bottom of the page the information on, this appears, and, it may be a little different in a word that's used or whatever here or there, and it'll say the MT or majority text reads this, So that is the conclusions for Bible versions. King James, New King James, we use them here at Calvary Chapel. Like I said, literal and literary. The majority of the manuscript evidence supports these versions. New American Standard and ESV, these are good versions of the Bible. However, they're translated using the limited New Testament manuscripts, as do most modern versions. They don't represent the majority of New Testament manuscripts. The thing that bothers me about the critical text or the limited number of manuscripts is they actually have verses that are translated in a way that they're not represented in any existing manuscript anywhere. The problem with that is that I think that the scholars that do the translation and this critical text, these few manuscripts from Alexandria, Egypt, they will decide what they think the best translation should be, even if it's not actually represented in any of their manuscripts. And I just, listen, I don't want to impugn motives to anybody that's bad or anything like that. That's not my point. I personally am not comfortable with that. I think that God is big enough to distribute all the manuscripts and give the Bible to the whole church, in a sense, if you will. And as he did that and spread the manuscripts out around really where Paul's missionary journeys were, that's really where the majority of manuscripts exist today. Many of them are, late up through the 10th century, right? And in saying that, it doesn't mean that they're less accurate, because they're also comparable to those in the second and maybe even the first century. They're also comparable to the early church fathers back into the second century when they quoted the Bible. So there's no way that, in a sense, we do not know what the Bible says. Okay, all the manuscripts that exist agree in 99 point whatever percent, and anything that is questionable, maybe did it use this word or that word here, or this sentence structure or that sentence structure here, or whatever. Those questions don't have anything to do with the doctrine of God or man or end times things or anything like that. In other words, it's not like, we're not questioning anything about God or man or anything like that. It's, it's in relation to non-critical things, not doctrines, like not Christian doctrine in that sense. So, hey, listen, if the only thing available was a New American Standard or an ESV, I'd be happy with that. But I think I can do better with King James, New King James. That's my opinion. Paraphrases, these are not Bible versions to study from, since they are more a commentary based on the interpreter's theological views, not an accurate representation of the New Testament manuscripts. They are literary, but not literal translations, since they accommodate the reader in favor of the text for translation. And basically, we kind of talked through all that. So that's it. The only other thing I can offer you, I do have a video on how to interpret the Bible. I can always do another one, but if you search on the channel, you'll find it on Bible interpretation. And again, that can be helpful as you're studying and finding out different principles and what to do in that. So anyways, hopefully this was helpful. It is a basics class, so if you have more detailed questions, email me at BibleMadeClear@gmail.com, or you can check out some of the other videos and see if they can be helpful. So anyways, with that, until next time, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word.